we've been asked to come up with some recommendations on the AGOA extension, which we think is imminent, because if AGOA isn't extended, we're going to talk about all the dire conflicts, crises, and pandemics which could incur because we won't have cold storage, we won't have jobs, and we're going to have a lot of immigration. So we don't want to talk about the downside ramifications of AGOA not being extended. Do I have everybody's attention now? Okay. The last 5 years have been historically difficult. If you've been trading in Africa, you've struggled with currency fluctuation, supply chain disruptions, and you name it. And now we can't argue that climate change isn't happening either. However, we are a panel of optimists. You won't know it when you're going to hear what they have to say, but we are a panel of optimists. Victor, where are you? We also have Kepsa who's going to speak. Where did Victor go? Come on, get up here. You've been up for all day. You can have my chair. Okay, so there's another, you see? I told you there's another chair. Great.
That's.
You all know I live in Kenya, and I'll be kicked out of Kenya if Victor can't say his few words. So he's going to come join us. So my job today is really to pick out from the incredible minds you have on this stage and the hundreds of years of experience they have between trade policy, trade analytics, data and analytics, trade negotiations, export and promotion, investment facilitation, and manufacturing. So that's my panel. And if you have any questions, they're going to be around to do business with you all afterwards, but we won't have time probably for the audience questions. We hope to stir up quite a debate with Victor. You're still not up here. Okay. We really expect quite a, thank you very much. I feel much better now. Please. We each, all right. So what I'm going to do is actually start with manufacturing because, you know, we've been talking about value addition all day long, but that's not an easy thing to do. And without value addition, we know that the U.S. Government won't actually see the benefit of AGOA to Africa because we get the question very often, why do we need this trade agreement? Why can't Africa just be trading? And why can't investments just occur? And we were just talking, Nico, about the risks and opportunities for U.S. jobs and manufacturing. And I think he also is manufacturing things that people don't like to talk about, plastics and chemicals, which are super important to everything everybody exports every day. So in your 2 words and 2 minutes, actually, just give us a quick overview because you've done business in the U.S. and in Africa and under trade agreements. So how can AGOA be extended and be better? I hope the technology works because the last panel fixed technology for us.
Well, it works now. So as a producer of polymers and chemicals, I think if you take a look at quality of life, it's a fact that we can't live without it. We just have to use it in a respectful manner. That is for sure. The other thing that is very important relative to AGOA, it allows African countries to effectively export material into the US. And if you compare the US market relative to the South African market, just from a size perspective, it's 100 times, more than 100 times our market. So the opportunity associated with AGOA is access into the US. And if AGOA can be stabilized, and if we can have a 10-year agreement on that, it will allow African producers to make direct business-to-business kind of contacts, rather than trying to trade via traders. If you do traders, you actually drive the strategy of the traders and not that of the producers. So we are not there to compete with American companies. We are there to work with them effectively, and that's what AGOA allows.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, I've worked in Ethiopia and a few other countries where the word trader was practically eliminated from vocabulary of the government. So we know how challenging that is. But let's talk about actual production, right? Agricultural production and export. It couldn't be harder than producing and exporting fresh fruit. Every risk of supply chain disruptions actually kills your market in hours, right? So if you could just give us a few examples, Sahara, from your experience exporting citrus to the U.S., how did you get started and how much lead time does it take from a production perspective, and how quickly could it all disappear if AGOA weren't extended?
Thank you, Vanessa, for the opportunity and also for everyone involved in arranging this AGOA Forum. I actually want to add a lot to what Niku said. You know, we operate in total different industries, but we have a lot of similarities. I would first like to add what you said about, which I think is very important if you do business in the US, is that Americans are super patriotic and you don't want to compete with them. And you have to have a market strategy that saying and telling them that you don't want to compete with them. You want to complement them. So if you go onto our website, our slogan is, we want to complement local production when otherwise unavailable. So I think that's very important, that you don't want to run into a fist fight with Americans, especially on their own territory. Also, you mentioned job creation, African producers, suppliers growing. There's the other side of the coin, and I can obviously only speak of the citrus industry in the US, as also a lot of expansion and jobs, facilities, sports, etc., on the US side. So it's both sides of the coin. It's not just in Africa; it's in the US as well. I mean, this program has grown 2.5 times over the last 4 years during a global supply chain disruption, during a global pandemic. But our success story is really about collaboration, and I've listened to some of the other panelists, and I think it's important what you've said on how big the US market actually is. That they mentioned, for example, wine. So what we do is we sell a country with confidence compared to our other Southern Hemisphere competitors. I'm a strong believer in collaboration, cohesiveness. So we sell summer citrus from South Africa. We have a little bit of a marketing strategy. We sell ourselves. We don't have the marketing dollars. Excuse me, like the big consumer brands. They are huge consumer brands in perishables, specifically in citrus. Like what we know consumer brands is Nike and Coke. In the US, you have Halo, so Security. It's a very well-known Mandarin brand in the US. I just visited their farms. They are huge. We don't have that kind of money. We don't have the money to buy shelf space. I'm all for choosing the right partners, long-term commercial relationships, and foster your relationship. Utilize your channels available to us, to yourself, like AGOA, like the governments on this side, the governments on that side. I work with a lot of, this is a bilateral agreement, so I work with a lot of government bodies, specifically in the perishable environment. I work with a lot of USDA counterparts. It's a protocol that we have to adhere, and I can honestly say that we speak with one voice when speaking to trade, and I would like to think that we have a solid story on collaboration of connecting service providers throughout the supply chain, starting with, in my group, growers, exporters, shipping lines. The world's shipping leaders are part of our program, bilateral entities, ports in South Africa and the US, the trade in the US, speaking with one voice, just connecting everybody throughout the supply chain. We have a little bit of a consumer approach as well, and I believe in, we are trying to sell a country, and the commercial partners part of this program. Thank you.
Well, I'm sold. Don't you all want to go buy some oranges, right? Great. So you've got orders lined up for later today, but Karen Bozeman is with Westgrow, and she's been talking about the success model. What does it take to be successful? And this is something I think a lot of people throughout the day have talked about, success and growth, but cracking the nut of under trade agreements with high regulations, stringent requirements, as was just described, all kinds of trade barriers. So what's the model? How does it work, Karen?
Okay, I'm not going to say we've cracked it, but we try very hard, and I like to think that we are reasonably successful. So I think to quote British Robertson earlier, she said it takes AGOA and trade promotion, and that's incredibly important. I think there are big exporters that can do it without the trade promotion, but obviously we want to really help the smaller guys, and not only the smaller guys. So for us, we cannot do anything without partnerships. Partnership with USAID, partnerships with DTIC, partnerships with the US Consulate in Cape Town, partnerships with the chambers. Everything we do, it is in partnership. We can do nothing alone. Partnerships with the export councils, very important.
Just tell us how it works, because a lot of people here don't know WestGrow. I mean,
Okay.
For you know it, but
Okay.
not
So WestGrow is the Tourism, Trade and Investment Promotion Agency for the Western Cape Province in South Africa. So we work to attract and facilitate foreign direct investment into the province. We help exporters to get into markets abroad, and we promote the destination for tourism. That is what we do. My colleague is the head of export. She's sitting over there. She does all the hard work. I just look at the policy side of things. So my role is really looking at what's not working, what are the regulatory barriers, where do we need to advocate for greater access, and sort of trying to use the data that we sit on to advocate back into the policy space. In terms of utilization of AGOA, South Africa is obviously a very large utilizer of AGOA. Within South Africa, the Western Cape Province is almost exclusively responsible for 5 of the top 10 exports under AGOA that are going to the US. So as a region, we are big users of AGOA and big beneficiaries of AGOA. And that is, on the one hand, largely to do with luck, that our export basket aligns quite well with AGOA. But on the other hand, it is really hard work from colleagues here who also are making the most of utilizing it. If we look at, so we use complexity mapping analysis to look at future opportunities, realistic export opportunities, short-term, medium, long-term. A lot of the opportunities are actually what we can export, and we're not. So there's a lot more that can be done with AGOA as it is. It doesn't necessarily, there is a lot that can be enhanced, but as it stands right now, given renewal for a longer term, there's a lot that can be done to enhance utilization with the existing HS codes.
All right. So, Paul, this is a perfect tee-up, right? Africa Coalition of Trade, although I think it should be for trade. But anyway, we can argue about your name later. But Paul Ryberg, if you don't know who Paulie is, you should just Google Paul and AGOA, and you'll get all kinds of stuff coming up on your Google search. But Paul, if you were to design AGOA better, right, and make your pitch right now to Lindsey Graham and say, hey, Lindsey, this is what we got to do, what's the pitch? I mean, what's the redesign of AGOA? What needs to happen?
You got it right the first time. What I really want to say is time is of the essence. Time is running out. In the second half of last year, apparel imports under AGOA grew by 25%. Set a new record. That was great. The first half of this year, they've collapsed by 15%. The U.S. Fashion Industry Association did a survey. Their members said, the reason is we're uncertain about the future of AGOA. We're cutting back our sourcing. AGOA has created approximately 300,000 direct jobs in apparel manufacturing and over 1 million indirect jobs supporting apparel manufacturing. Those jobs are in serious jeopardy. At the ministerial, Minister Patel today proposed renewing AGOA by September of 2024. With all due respect, that's too late. The U.S. Congress will be in election season by September. It won't even be in session in October and November. So AGOA has to be renewed by June of 2024 at the latest. If we don't get it done by then, it'll be 2025. There'll be a new Congress convened, and we have to start the process all over again.
Okay, just as a reminder, for those of you like me who can't remember what year it is, it's November 2023. That leaves us exactly 7 months, counting from today. So I appreciate your urgency because I feel it. And like you and I have been doing this dance around the continent for a while, that urgency is something that is not well appreciated because a lot of people think, kind of like planting trees. AGOA matures over time. Those fruits bear fruit. But Eckhart's been analyzing this. Do you guys know Trelac? Raise your hand. You've heard of Trelac? Oh, yeah. Oh, he didn't think you knew the brand, but I thought you would. So Eckhart's the guy behind those great data and analytical publications. But, you and I have been talking about this as well, saying if it could be done better. So it's got to be done fast. Paul said it very clearly. If it's going to be done better, what has it got to look like?
Thank you, Vanessa. Time is of the essence, and I think it's worth contextualizing. At the moment, AGOA beneficiary countries only account for 0.9% of total U.S. imports. So it really ought not to be much of a discussion. It's not a threat to U.S. commerce. That
means
benefit.
Less than 1% for the Americans in the room who don't know.
Less than 1% of African beneficiary countries export to the United States. That's the market share in terms of U.S. imports. The AGOA component is 0.3%. It's very little. It's literally a rounding error. The word was used early on. So really there isn't that much controversy around that. I think another thing that is important to bear in mind is that AGOA mustn't be seen as simply a preference scheme for African countries or to benefit Africa. Every trade transaction has a beneficiary on both sides, the buyer and the seller, and everyone behind it. So every benefit that goes to an African country equally goes to a US importer and a consumer. And an industry that uses those imports. So it really is a win-win for both sides.
Are you guys tweeting this? These are like tweetable moments, and Congress is watching you. I just want you to know, especially if Jaspiri tweets it. I'm just saying.
Another thing that is important that we often don't talk about is the US GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences. There's a 75% overlap on the product coverage between the GSP and AGOA. The GSP, unfortunately, and AGOA is based on the GSP, except it makes it more secure, it gives more permanence to these preferences that have been around since 1974. That hasn't been reauthorized for the last 3 years. Without AGOA, there's nothing. If AGOA is allowed to expire, there is no fallback. And even if the GSP expires, for countries like South Africa and Kenya and Nigeria and Gabon, Gabon is soon out, but Ghana and Botswana and Namibia, those are non-LDC countries. So those countries only have a part of the GSP benefits to fall on. So it really is critical. And I know the proposal from African countries has often been to extend it by 10 years. Out of the blue came a proposal a draft bill in Congress recently, John Kennedy proposing to extend it by 20 years. And I want to kind of put the cat amongst the pigeons. Why not make it permanent? There's absolutely no reason not to make AGOA permanent.
You can applaud. I'll take a cue. You can applaud.
And the reason for that, there is a precedent for that. The United States already has a preference scheme or arrangement program called the Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act. That is permanent. That offers preferences to Caribbean countries. I think there are 17 beneficiary countries with permanent benefits, permanent preferences. So really, I think there is precedent. I think that argument should be made. AGOA benefits both sides of the Atlantic. I have a few ideas on how to make it better, but maybe there's another round. But there are a couple of things that one can do to the AGOA legislation on bettering the utilization rates.
We'll take that in the second round. So, I got to leave a little bit for Whitney to say. So Whitney Scheineman, again, this is kind of like the All-Stars basketball team where you get the best and the brightest. So we get to hear from some of the greatest minds who've been thinking about this for a way long time. So Whitney, just add into the factor, and I want to underscore what we started out with, Nico, on the investment side and the value addition side, which, because the private sector has to be able to follow and understand all of this regulatory framework.
Right. Thank you, Vanessa. So for me, you started by saying that we're optimists, but I'm also a maximalist. How can we really modernize?
Maximalist?
Yeah.
Tweet that one too.
I mean, it's a challenge. How can we really modernize AGOA to not only so African countries take more benefit from it, but America does as well, and U.S. companies. And the ideas I think about start with tax incentives. We saw when Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act last June, they offered tax incentives for critical minerals. Well, I think there should be a tax incentive in an extended AGOA that would enable countries to repatriate earnings at a zero tax from investments in critical sectors such as critical minerals, digital infrastructure, manufacturing, agro-processing, renewable energy systems. And the reason this is so important, Vanessa, Americans, when they look at the African market, the first thing they think about is the risk. Everybody here in this expo, I think when they think about Africa, they think about the opportunity. So how do we shift that narrative? And one of the ways of doing it is through tax incentives, which lowers the risk, increases the returns overnight. So I think it's really important to include something like that.
Well, we're going way out on the limb. So, tax incentives would be a whole nother legislative debate, but I think it's worthy of discussion. And I think DFC should consider that in your next reform bill, don't you think? Okay, but coming to...
I got, just let me take
30 seconds.
Two other things. I think we have to look at the conditionalities.
Yes.
Because right now, a country can get kicked out every year. We need to extend that to a 5-year review.
Okay, good.
The third issue is national utilization strategies. The reality is only 16 countries have these strategies. That's why it's underutilized. And I think the U.S. government, USAID in particular, has to collaborate much more carefully. And we've seen the countries that have the utilization strategies, they've increased their AGOA exports from 80% to 3,000%. And when a government thinks about their comparative advantage to the U.S., well, the next step is to think about their comparative advantage to other African countries, which brings me to my last point, and that's aligning AGOA with the AFCFTA, which is absolutely critical because this is the first ministerial that an AFCFTA has existed.
Okay, trading amongst African countries has always been under the conversation that Flory and I have traveled to Cameroon and to the end of the world to try and figure out how Africa can trade with Africa just as much as with the U.S. And there are a lot of people who say, first you got to do business at home before you do business abroad and make it all these complicated variables. But Kenya has been a star performer recently, right? Wouldn't you agree? If you don't agree, I want to talk to you after this session. Kenya's been a star performer, and Victor could speak for hours about that, but I won't give him hours. You got a minute, just like everybody else on this panel, which is, in your opinion, right, Kenya is struggling also to continue that consumer and investment confidence, right? Every year we wonder, is it going to blow up again? Is the election going to fail? Is there going to be some kind of backlash? So how do we grow investor confidence in a long-term way that also complies with this trade agreements? And is Kenya going to get out in front and do a free trade agreement with the U.S.? Okay, 1 minute.
I think it took you more than a minute to ask the question.
Oh.
But I should answer it in a minute. And the question is longer than a minute. Anyway, I think you've asked a very good question. We have some experience as Kenya Private Sector Alliance. The first thing that an investor looks at is your image as a country in terms of ease of doing business, cost of doing business, predictability of policies, policy cohesion. These are the things that an investor looks at. And that's why there's even a worry. Those who have invested over the years under AGOA, they are worried right now. Those are investors that are worried. And that is a point of inflection for them. Whether this AGOA is predictable or do they need to fold up. So policy predictability, including AGOA, needs to be very predictable to investors so that they get to know whether before the next election this the framework could have to be extended for another whatever how many years. That is a very, very important thing. Coming back to Africa again, that's also very important for us, that we must show investors predictability of our policies. That's very, very key. not a situation where every year, every budget year, there are new policies that are emerging to negate the ones that were that came afresh the previous budget year. So we tend to have a lot of unpredictability of our policies, and this is a concern. So KEPSA has been at the forefront of pushing for these kind of issues. At least investors are looking long-term. Tax policies, for instance, really need to take a long-term view, not changing every budget year. And so these are the things that we've been able to do through our advocacy. I will stress on the importance of convening power for business associations. You really must talk in one voice. That's what we do at KEPSA. We have a tremendous convening power of all the sectors, businesses in all the sectors of the economy, so that we align our needs, we align our priorities, meet with the government, and co-create solutions. We do not sit to leave the government alone to be doing the policies. Remember, AGOA, much as it's a G2G framework, at the heart of it is trade and investment, and governments do not trade. You, as businesses, are at the center of this framework, and you must be at the center of shaping its utilization by being available, being present on the table, and that means you have to unite and speak in one voice. And for that to happen, you must have a convening power, like we have convened here today. Vanessa,
he wrote 2 pages in answer to my half-a-page question.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
So you wrap up. Yeah.
So we have to consolidate our issues, even as we are looking at the extension, improving utilization. What do we want together? I know there are peculiarities between countries, but there must be some common commonalities amongst us. And Vanessa, if you allow me, I don't know whether I'll get another minute, but if you allow me, 20 years ago when we had AGOA, or 23 years ago, the terrain is different. A lot of things have changed for Africa. There are new emerging sectors that are more important right now that will drive the development of Africa that were not within the horizon in 2000, for instance. The digital economy has become very, very important, digital trade. If you are going to create jobs for these youths, how do we embed? So we're actually talking about perhaps the renewal of AGOA could consider AGOA Plus. Some of the most important sectors to Africa that were not there ought to be included. Financial sectors.
Let's leave it there. We'll leave it suspension, ... to be continued. Thank you so much. Okay, so I have to cut you off. Otherwise, these other people are going to feel left out. Now, this is the thing. You're right. AGOA has to be extended, has to be improved, maximized, but it also has to be reauthorized. If we make it too complicated, will it ever get extended, right? We have 7 months and counting. And just for curiosity, how many of you are either part of an industry association, a leader, or a member of an industry association? Please, just raise your hands, right? Because this is what you're talking about, right? It's how we work together, Westgrow working with KEPSA, working with CCA. So, Nico, how do we make this nuts and bolts? How do we get it done? And again, we also want value addition. I want your insights because people are saying we've had enough of commodity trading. GSP has been a lot about the generalized system of preferences, a lot of commodity trading, and you're in manufacturing. So how do we get more manufacturing and a 7-month turnaround on U.S. reauthorizing AGOA?
Yeah, I think it's very important that first of all you have to have surety of policy. That on the one hand. But if you have a policy, you have to train people up on it, and you have to make a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're not going to get anywhere without so the policy on itself doesn't help at all. And then thirdly, you have to collaborate, because you should not use the policy to try and compete with established industries. It's not going to work for you. Surety of policy, training on what does it mean, have a plan, and then implement. It's relatively simple. But if you take a look, as I've said before, at the South African chemical industry, we are declining by 20% over the last 20 years. And the American chemical industry is 100 times our size. A small change, more exports into the US, significant change for the South African industry.
but relatively insignificant in the U.S.
Completely insignificant in the US, and as we have said before, we are not there to compete with them.
Will it benefit the rest of Africa if South Africa grows the industry?
It will definitely do, because it will increase our competitiveness and also our capability to grow on the African kind of continent.
Excellent. If you didn't say that, I'd have to throw you off the panel anyway. So, I mean, you had to say that. So let me just say back to the citrus question, because, you know, we've talked about risks, and AGOA not getting renewed is one risk, but climate change is here. We're talking about future-proofing and risk mitigation. I'm sure that when you're and as we just heard a couple sessions ago in the ag panel, everybody is having to think, and Jazz mentioned this in cotton as well, right? Some of the raw materials are dependent on, access, which is climate dependent. So future-proofing, risk mitigation as how shall I say, sine qua non, like unavoidable requirements in order to grow the industry. I kept pressuring you earlier. What's it going to take to grow and export more? But part of it is risk mitigation. Tell us what you know.
Thank you. I think, first of all, I said this to you before, I believe in sustained growth. The US, there's definitely opportunity for growth, but it needs to be sustained. It needs to be in a responsible manner. You really need to know your market. You know that you are tackling one of the world's largest economies. So first of all, you need to sell them the right product, and you need to know your market. You touched a little bit on weather. Agriculture is extremely dependable on weather, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have going forward. We had a lot of rain in the Western Cape, and that means you have to go to Plan C, Plan D, Plan E, Plan F to stay in the market. But in our case, with the support of our supply chain service providers, we actually reached our target. We were not going to reach our target in May, I don't know, where we had a lot of rain in the Western Cape. So I think for me, this whole panel, we are all saying the same things, collaboration. And, don't see the one next to you necessarily as your competitor. We need to go into the US as a unified entity, selling a country with confidence. I also, when you say about, AGOA renewal, what's been said that it's policies, government, but it's actually the trade that's benefiting. I think it's important to take our well-deserved place at the table. When they have an AGOA forum, show up. Take your seat at the table, and it's about getting the right people around the table at the right time. And I think that's how we're going to be able to go forward.
And she flew in for the day, so I appreciate when she says show up, she's putting her money where her mouth is. Karen, I was thinking about subsidies. The U.S. doesn't like subsidies, World Bank, IMF, we talk about this. And yet, you want to incentivize people to invest into a market and see an economic impact. So, what's the trade-off? What's the offer? And how critical is that to actually growing utilization of AGOA?
Yeah, that's it. Interesting one, given what's happening in the world right now. And I think there's a very, very real risk of Africa being left out of the green industrial revolution, so to speak, or the drive to green industrialization. The major markets that invest in South Africa and the Western Cape in Africa are completely re-engineering their economies. Very focused on bringing investment back. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Africa in the diversification of supply chains internationally, but I think there was a moment where it was sort of, there was a lot of opportunity, diversification of supply chain, and then we saw Inflation Reduction Act, EU Green Deal, Green Industrial Deal, even a lot of other markets that are incentivizing and subsidizing local manufacturing. I think it's still very, we still have a very competitive cost of operation here, but we are now suddenly competing with, localization policies, for lack of a better word, in other markets. And I think as a continent, we need to rethink how we show up and how we don't get left out. And I do think also our trading partners maybe also need to think about the repercussions that are maybe unintended in terms of driving investment away, where we just have that opportunity right now to
Yeah, we talked earlier
attract
about
the investment.
the potential carbon tax, right,
Yeah.
coming out of Europe really quickly, and is the U.S. going to go in that direction? Who knows? Paul, I want to come to you with the opportunity cost. If AGOA goes away, who's coming into Africa? You know, we kind of talk about the downside risk, but what do you see? Let's go into the depths of the darkest moment here.
Well, it would be a catastrophe, especially for those sectors that are natural fits with AGOA. And the most obvious one is textiles and apparel. Very high duty products, low tech, low capital, labor intensive, perfect fit with AGOA. It will be eviscerated if AGOA goes away. And I'm going to change my answer to your first question very slightly. There's one change I want to make, and it's related to AGOA going away, and that's graduation. AGOA originally contemplated, or Congress contemplated, that AGOA would gradually transition into free trade agreements and permanent benefits, no conditionalities. So under the original scheme, graduation was a reward. But the U.S. no longer negotiates FTAs, so today the prospect of graduation is a death sentence. Let's punish those who succeed. Well, that makes no sense at all. And that needs to be addressed. There are a variety of ideas that we've been floating around Congress for resolving this really stupid situation that we have right now. So that's my one change I recommend.
I appreciate that one, and I worry about it myself. Eckhart, I just wanted to come back to you with another question, which you're not going to like. But was discussed earlier today. There was a conversation of special economic zones and, you know, kind of what the government has to do, whether it's trade corridor investments. Someone mentioned infrastructure investments. Are these preconditions for trade to grow? How do you see that? Are there other benchmarks that you've been looking at? And in the U.S. Africa Leadership Summit, there was a lot of discussion of the U.S. leaning into all the different agencies, not just trade. Is that going to be possible, or are we just, hoping and dreaming for something that can't be realized?
I think it's an important discussion to be had, but I don't think it is necessarily one that is a good fit for an AGOA renewal. Or, I think there are other mechanisms of achieving that. And before kind of getting to another point, I want to add that to address that particular comment, I think in terms of utilization, many of the barriers do not lie in the AGOA legislation or the terms and conditions. They lie often on the supply side, on production, on making products that are competitive in the US market, that are well packaged, are preserved, the cold chain being preserved, navigating trade facilitation issues, the border issues, customs regulations, the US regulatory environment around foodstuffs, for example, sanitary and phytosanitary measures. All of these have to be navigated by exporters, and all of these contribute, or managing those, contribute to better utilization. But I think, again, a bit of context is necessary here. AGOA takes away import duties on roughly 60% of total tariff lines, total classification lines. That's essentially, that's a AGOA point. But just because a country doesn't utilize AGOA preferences that well doesn't mean it is paying duties for the others. 37% of the remaining 40% are duty-free anyway under normal tariff relations, MFN, or the United States calls it NTR. So pretty much all countries are subject to duty-free treatment to 37% of the total. So 60% plus 37% makes it 97% in total. So there's a certain bit of a natural upper limit to improved utilization. But if one wants to improve the AGOA legislation, and again, going back to your point about not overcomplicating things, there are probably 2 or 3 things where one can improve it. One is, as I mentioned earlier on, make AGOA permanent. And just to back that further is the United States already is in a low tariff environment. So the cost or the risk to the United States of making AGOA permanent is very low. The average import duty into the United States is 2.5%. That's already that big tranche of reductions took place in the 1990s. Now we're in a very low tariff environment, and AGOA preferences are largely tied to preference margins. So there are still tariff peaks. Some tariffs, textiles and clothing is particularly high. There are others that are quite high. But it just means that over time, as these tariffs reduce further, the potential value or the cost to the US government in terms of lost import duties is going to be declining rather than increasing. In terms of making changes and keeping it simple, sometimes there's talk about the rules of origin. Now, I'm not sure if the United States is going to be flexible on changing the rules of origin. They're already very favorable on the textiles and apparel side. The general rules require 35% local content. I don't think there's that much to be argued against that. But and generally internationally, rules of origin are the most difficult thing to change. It's just there's a lot of resistance to it because it impacts on customs and processes, and the United States has a consistent approach to rules of origin for all its imports. So, it's very difficult to do that. But you can make some nuanced changes around the accumulation provisions. And I think, someone mentioned earlier, and I think, Whitney, you might have mentioned it. But if you incorporate, and maybe just on that, last year the United States signed an agreement with the AFCFTA Secretariat around supporting the AFCFTA. Now, if you want to add meat to that and really give credence to that, then do something here. Allow accumulation. Don't necessarily make all AFCFTA countries, all African Union countries AGOA beneficiaries. That might be asking too much. But at least bring them into the fold by allowing accumulation by AGOA beneficiary countries with input materials produced in other African countries that might not be AGOA beneficiaries, North African countries, Morocco, an FTA country with the United States, and even go one step further. Europeans have been doing it. They've extended their rules of origin to allow accumulation on any material made in any country with which the EU has a free trade agreement or which is duty-free into the EU. The United States could follow there, and that would definitely, I think, make a significant difference. Then I think, just in terms of quotas, I mentioned early on,
I know you have a whole page of notes here, just wrapping up.
That's my last comment. AGOA only does away with import duties. It does not do away with quotas. Quotas remain. There are quotas for lots of agricultural products, tobacco, dairy products. Textiles and clothing have a quota. It's very high. It's never been reached. But there's something potentially where there could be some leniency towards African countries in terms of either removing quotas or having a special quota or making some kind of concession. But certainly, AGOA at the moment only deals with tariffs, not with quotas. Thanks.
This is the lineup of who you want at the negotiating table. We could add a few more people. I can see half of the room would like to join the negotiating table. But let me just ask you a question, Whitney. U.S. consumer behavior is underpinning what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about a growing, thriving, demanding, complex market in the U.S. And I and you all have seen changes in consumer behavior. What can we see and do collectively also to influence the consumer side so that there's more of a demand pull as well for products made in Africa, more transparency, more favorable investments, longer-term trade agreements? What can we do?
You mean which would translate into AGOA's renewal?
Exactly. Because if you had, consumers in California jumping up and down and saying, hey, Governor Newsom, we need AGOA, he'd be up in D.C. demanding, right?
Yeah, well, I would say, more immediate is not so much mobilizing the American consumer as it is mobilizing African voices. Because one of the critical elements that got AGOA over the goal line the first time in 2000 was the African Diplomatic Corps in Washington writing a letter to the Speaker of the House, the head of the Senate, saying, we want this legislation, we need this legislation. So all the people who put up their hands saying that they're head of trade associations, I would urge you to write letters to American congressmen, African voices. This is why AGOA is so important to us. And I think that would really resonate in Washington because the Corporate Council on Africa is going to be advocating, Paul's going to be advocating, the Chamber's going to be advocating. But we really need African voices and American industry voices coming together. And I'm highly confident that we can get AGOA renewed.
He gave up on my consumer question, but he had a better answer than I could ask about. So, Victor, KEPSA, are you ready to write who you're going to write? And you have Ambassador Meg Whitman. I mean, mobilizing a super vocal U.S. ambassador is another route. So what do you think?
I think looking at AGOA, if we're going for renewal, I think we also must be bold enough.
You mean not if, but since.
When or since. We must be bold enough to be held jointly accountable to increasing the utilization. We shouldn't just push for renewal without on our part agreeing to be held accountable as government, as businesses, that we are going to improve the utilization through our local domestic investments. And that would mean perhaps agreeing to certain metrics of utilization that we are going to assess ourselves on. Otherwise, we will be back here in another 10 years and we are saying AGOA has not delivered. We must agree to certain utilization matrices, performance matrices, and we assess ourselves as countries every single year. What is the improvement? The second thing, there would be a message. What is the likely amount of investment and jobs that might be lost in the event that
we need the numbers.
AGOA is not renewed? I think that should form part of our
We need those numbers.
key messages.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we cannot just send to Congress intentional, verbose words without the numbers. What is the likely investment erosion, job losses in the event that AGOA is not renewed?
I'm told we have 2 minutes left. So you each get the one-word wrap-up or two to say what you're going to do to help move this forward. We have 7 months. So starting with you, Nico, how are you going to move this agenda forward? Can you give him a mic?
Thank you. As the chemical associated industry, we need to lobby at government. And we need to lobby to get it renewed. We need to lobby to get people trained. And we need to lobby to have a plan.
So I'm taking that as we, meaning you as the chairman, are going to lobby. Thank you. All right, let's hear from the citrus industry of South Africa, Sunhara.
Thank you. I always say when I quit this job, I would like to be remembered for one thing. As I like to write at the end of a presentation as something. I can only speak for my group, and I think we have a lot of similarities between us. I would like to say that we as a group have gained a lot of momentum with our collaborative approach, and we intend to keep it going. I agree that we must all stand together, specifically trade in the whole of Africa and the US, going to Washington and our governments on our side. And that's how we're going to move forward.
I think that was like 15 words, but wrapping it up, Karen.
Concrete examples and what can be added to enhance the investment proposition as opposed to just the export proposition.
Excellent. Enhancing investment. Paul.
For the last 9 months, I've worked every day on AGOA renewal, and I promise you I will do it every day until it's done.
Woohoo! Who's him with him? I am with him. All right. Eckerts, you can say more than 9 months.
Update the eligibility review process so you don't punish the wrong people, the ultimate beneficiaries of a trade agreement, the workers. And secondly, make AGOA permanent. It is not a big ask.
Yes, make AGOA permanent. Tweet, hashtag.
So I think thought leadership is very important. And by this, I don't mean just blogs. I mean virtual conversations between businesses in Africa and the U.S., getting members of Congress into those conversations.
So you're going to lead that,
and
right?
Making a lot of noise, yes.
He's saying he's going to do that. Thank you so much. Victor, last word.
AGOA renewal and utilization must go hand in hand with the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. That is how we are going to promote investments.
Amen. Steve Landy, last word. There's a mic right behind you. If you don't use it, no one will hear you. And it is the last word, Steve.
I'm 82 years old, so I beg you for 2 minutes, and I thank you because next year I'll have Alzheimer's, who knows. But let me take there.
1 minute, 30
Seriously,
seconds.
I'll be really fast. I agree with everything that was said except for 3 points, and I want to be clear. AGOA will be renewed this year. Not in 6 months, not in 7 months. There are 2 bills coming up in Congress, and the new Speaker of the House would like to add something. So to me, I want it done this year. And the reason it has to be done this year, because AGOA must be enhanced. If AGOA is only renewed and not enhanced, we'll take care of the textile sector, Paul Weiberg, but we'll take care of nothing else, and very few products move. So
Thank
my
you.
basic suggestion, give me another minute.
No, I'm sorry.
My basic suggestion is that we focus on this year, enhancement, and we make the program permanent exactly as suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, and a big round of applause for our esteemed panelists, and a photo op of our mega super duper thought leader panel. And I hope everybody in the room took away some notes on what you're doing next.